Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Hi, I'm Chelsey Youman. I'm your guest host today for Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable Edition. I'm so grateful to have you guys listening to our show today, because we have an action-packed show with some wonderful guests, some wonderful topics. Hopefully, of course, have to talk a little bit about the coronavirus, but have some other topics to refresh you with today as well. Our first guest is going to be Jonathan Teague. He is in the marital ministry with Prestonwood, and I would love for you to introduce yourself, Jonathan.
Well, thank you, Chelsey. It's so great to be with you guys again. And I'm the Ministry of Married Adults at Prestonwood, and been there almost 9 years. My wife, Michelle, and I been married almost 18 years. We got 4 little kiddos. They're all at the house today, so they're having a blast. But it's great to be with you guys.
Wonderful, wonderful. And our second guest today is Shane Pruitt, and he is with the Baptist Ministry, Southern Baptist Ministry. And Shane, go ahead and introduce yourself for our listeners.
Hey, Chelsey, good to be back. My name is Shane Pruitt. I am the National Next Gen Evangelism Director for the North American Mission Board. That is a mouthful. So that is the national entity for Southern Baptist. So working with 47,000 churches and state conventions, local associations, and it's a joy and honor to serve the kingdom in that capacity.
Well, thank you, guys. I'm going to leave all the theology to you today, any of our ministry topics to you. I'm sure our listeners have maybe heard me before, but I am with Human Coalition Action, and I am an attorney and a lobbyist working on pro-life issues, advocating for women who are pregnant or find themselves in need of help and assistance, but also on behalf of their preborn children to save lives. So I'm in a little bit of a different field, but it's all ministry and it's all important work, especially during this time when everybody finds themselves needing as a community to come together. So today we've got a few topics on the books. The first I want to talk to you about is an article piece by Pathos that came out talking about Tony Morgan's 10 signs that your church is maybe outdated or not going to reach the next generation. And he came out with some heavy-hitting advice to what he calls boomers about how they should really revamp their churches around meeting the needs of the next generation. I'll give a couple of his points to our audience. And by the way, I should probably preface this with the fact that it's not satirical. When I and the rebuttal article came out, we both first assumed it was satirical, but it wasn't. And he talked about things like not saying open up your Bibles, but instead saying turn on your Bibles, because everybody has their Bibles in their apps now. And things like, if you should not be worried about the volume of music, make sure you have, of course, a light haze to really have a good worship environment. Don't pass an offering plate anymore. Don't have CDs for your ministry and topics. Things just that he thinks are outdated about the way the church is. And he made the point at the end, which I think is his real point, that the church really saw it become a little bit more contemporary in music style in the 90s, but hasn't really updated since. So I would love for you are both in the ministry. You both work with, we're all millennials, but you, Shane, work with definitely the younger generation. I think are so equipped to speak to this issue. And then Jonathan, you, of course, work with my generation on getting married and those obstacles. So I'd love to hear your point of view on the issue at hand.
I'm really thrilled to have this conversation with Shane, because I have a great deal of respect for his ministry. He was just at our church a few weeks ago and was leading out and communicating with our students, well over 1,000 kids, and kind of more the Generation Z quadrant, which is where our denomination is really sort of centered its next big focus. And I'm so thrilled about that, and how God's using Shane in his ministry of preaching and teaching the word. And I think really there's some overlap generationally between millennials and Gen Z, and then not so much. And I think when I read Tony's article, actually a couple weeks ago when it came out, so I was glad to see y'all had seen that. We were going to talk about it. Just one of his big tweet outlines, right? You can't reach the next generation of young adults without being a church for young adults. And I appreciate the spirit behind that. And I think, yeah, definitely we've seen not only in our denomination, but I mean, I think it's pretty unilaterally agreed that across the board, there's a slide of disengagement of young adults out of the church. I don't personally think that necessarily young people, young adults, millennials, and for sure Gen Z kids, which I have 4 in my house. I know Shane has a bunch in his house. I don't think that generation is going to slide the same way. I mean, data's still coming, but I think something different, and I know Shane's going to want to talk about that, but I know I think something different's welling up with teenagers and students. I did student ministry for a long time, so I'm sensitive about that and love that ministry. But yeah, Chelsey, I think the idea that church needs to only be centered on one demographic of people, I think there's probably a good intention there, but I think biblically that's a miss. Mm-hmm. And not at all to sound critical, but I think the moment we start segmenting and compartmentalizing ministry to one block of people, we've actually missed some implications of the scripture, places like Titus 2 and other places where we're called to intergenerationally gather. Mm-hmm. And so that idea of congregation is really the word congregate. And it spins off this idea of community, right? We can't community well, right? We can't koinonia well only amongst ourselves, that there's an overlap of people groups. That's true from the day of Pentecost to the early church to today. So although I appreciate the spirit and I appreciate the idea here that we want to be creative and engaging with the next generation, a lot of whom have disengaged from the church to whatever degree you want to measure that, I think the idea that we would only exclusively create our culture around in our churches around just one people group, I think is personally, and in my experience, is actually the opposite of what most young adults who are interested particularly in engaging in the life of the church, I think that's actually the opposite of what they need.
Yeah, that's a great point. Shane, did you have any input? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. I love this topic. And oh, man, there's so many layers to this. And I just want to say this, too, like that I've personally interacted with Tony multiple times. Mm-hmm. Tony's Morgan is a great guy. The Unstuck group is super helpful to churches. Yeah, there's plenty of this article that I agree with and disagree with. And when he says, to reach, to be a church, to reach young adults, you got to be a church for young adults. I think there's a lot to be asked about that. Is he saying this in a way where you just totally ignore all the older generations, or do you say, hey, this has got to be who we go after? Mm-hmm. And if you're speaking evangelistically, I'm okay saying this is who we unapologetically need to go after as the next generation. Because when you look at it evangelistically, one thing we do know by statistics is 77% of people surrender to Jesus before the age of 18. So when you poll adults now to say, hey, at what age did you surrender to Jesus as Lord and Savior? 77% did it before the age of 18. 95% did before the age of 30. Mm-hmm. So typically our young adult ministries are just a program of the church, or they're a segment of the church, when really that should be the front line of our evangelical efforts. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't reach them by the age of 30, now God's sovereign. He can save who he wills when he wants to. But practically speaking, if you don't reach somebody by the age of 18, especially by the age of 30, chances are you're probably not going to reach them with the gospel.
That is such a good point, Shane. Yeah. And I think of, myself included, how important and instrumental my youth group was. And even starting in like the 7th grade and the 6th grade, having somebody come alongside me besides my parents to teach me how to read my Bible, even, was so huge in my own development. So I do appreciate you saying that. We do have a break coming up. So just don't forget to go to pointofview.net or follow us on Facebook, like us on Facebook, Point of View Radio.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Two of the founding fathers that deserve more attention are Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. While the Hamilton musical provides us with some perspectives and entertainment, I would recommend the book by Jay Cost, The Price of Greatness, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and the Creation of American Oligarchy. He was on the Point of View radio program to talk about his book. These two men belonged to a political movement with three fundamental foundations. The first was the commitment to liberal government that emphasized the protection of individual rights. The Declaration of Independence argued that governments are instituted among men in order to secure certain unalienable rights. That idea, written by Thomas Jefferson, was influenced by the writings of John Locke. The second foundation was a belief in self-government, often referred to as republicanism. A republic allowed the citizens to be governed by laws that they actually had a hand in creating. A monarch did not hand down these laws. They were established by we the people. The third foundation was nationalism. The 13 separate colonies agreed to bind themselves together in a national union of 13 states. This is where there was the greatest division between Federalist and Anti-Federalist, and they ended up dividing Hamilton from Madison. Hamilton emphasized national vigor and was eager to promote the Bank of the United States and other programs that would grow the national government. Madison, on the other hand, wanted to pursue what he called the Republican balance. He feared that Hamilton's policies favored the wealthy. In reading this book by Jay Cost, I was struck by the reality that many of the debates in the founding of this country continue to this day. Many of the ideas put forward by Hamilton and Madison are still debated today in the halls of Congress. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm Chelsey Youman. I'm your host for Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable, where we hope to give you some millennial perspectives on current events, current issues, and just things that millennials like to talk about. I'm here today with Jonathan Teague, who is the minister to married adults at Prestonwood Baptist Church, and he's here to give us his infinite wisdom. I'm also here with Shane Pruitt, who is with the Southern Baptist Convention and works with youth groups and across our South, really, on spreading the gospel. So I'm so grateful to have you guys and your ministry minds as we continue our discussion today on how to reach the younger generation, younger audiences, and really, do churches need to update? Do they need to pander to younger audiences? Is it a miss? And we have our articles on pointofview.net if you want to read up more on what it is we're discussing today. So Shane was making such an interesting point before we left about really continuing to seek out the heart of the matter and what the next generation's seeking. And I'd love to get back to that in a minute. You know, I'm personally reminded that we talked about this on the break. Millennials have actually converted at higher rates to more hierarchical churches, more traditional churches. Catholic, Episcopalian, and Presbyterian congregations are all up due to the millennial generation. And I know personally so many people, even after college, friends of mine, were wanting to convert because they were tired of being almost overly marketed to. They were tired of feeling like our generation has had so much digital marketing in our lives. And I'm sure the same is true of the younger generation, that we kind of see through it and we desire really the core heart of the issue, authentic values of repentance and the gospel and grace. Those are just the core values. And so when I read articles like the OK Boomer 10 Signs articles by Tony Morgan, which came out, and then the Patheos response, which is what you guys, I would say, more seem to align with. I am reminded just that the gospel is core regardless of age, regardless of background. I mean, the gospel is core and central to really church. It should be. So did you guys have any more input on that? Shane, did you have any more you wanted to add?
Yeah, definitely. As you just kind of, scroll through his list of 10 signs, your weekend services aren't designed for the next generation. There are, I do want to say there's multiple things I do agree with, things that I kind of agree with both sides of that article and the Patheos article. Like, for example, one is the Bible on your phone. He's like, hey, don't say open your Bible or turn to this. And I think it's both. Whenever I'm personally speaking, preaching, I'll say turn to or scroll to, and recognize there's both. I think one thing we do have to be cautious of is I think there's some overlap where, used to 10 years ago, like put your phones away during work, put your phones up, don't have your phone out. And we just assume if somebody has their phone out, they're texting or on social media. And I know my 13-year-old, she has her Bible on her phone, and she has a paper Bible. And so sometimes, I've made that mistake of, hey, put your phone away. And she's showing me her phone and she's got the sermon outline. And to be honest, she's taking better notes than I am, so there's that moment of conviction, And I think, so I think we have to be aware that people do have their phones, Bibles on their phones, the notes on their phones. And I can't think back, of my pastor in the church I got saved in, growing up in, is he used to say, whenever he'd say, open your Bibles to the Gospel of John, he'd say, the rustling of Bible pages warms my soul. And now I think it's both. It's the rustling of Bible pages and the soft glow of your smartphone on your face. Right, if it's got the Word of God on it, it warms my soul. So I think we just recognize that that God used them both, and I can't think of, I can't help but think of 3-4 weeks ago, we did a conference at the Urban Convention Center, and Carey Nieuwhof was there. And Carey Nieuwhof is a very popular podcaster, author, especially in the areas of leadership. And it's almost a prophetic word 4 weeks ago. This was 4 weeks ago. We had 3,300 people there, mainly leaders. And he said, hey, either by volunteerism or by force, we're all going to have to move digital in how we do ministry. Mm-hmm. And here we are 4 weeks later.
We're living it right now, right?
Right, yeah. At this very moment. It was almost a prophetic word 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, Kerry was with our staff several months ago and kind of alluded to something that Shane just said. And I think one of the realities, Chelsey, too, in church life is we've always sort of turned creativity and consistency into adversaries. Mm-hmm. And that didn't have to be that way. And so I appreciate the spirit behind what Tony's saying is say, let's not abandon creativity. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think, to your point, with your experiences, I don't know if Shane's seen this in the places he speaks and the folks that I disciple and meet with, there's this kind of return back, though, to continuity, mm-hmm. right? So, like, mm-hmm. a great example would be, like, Stranger Things, like the phenomenon on Netflix, right? Mm-hmm. That's like an 80s show, man. Mm-hmm. Like, if that was made 30 years ago, that would have been primetime TV on a Monday night at 8 o'clock, right after Who's the Boss or something, all right? Mm-hmm. Right? But Stranger Things is like this hearkening back to what once was. I think there's this nostalgia reach that's happening for a lot of young adults where they want to go back to things that make sense or that feel right or that they feel connected with. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting, like, how do we balance technological engagement right now? Like, we're telling our people right now, 40,000 plus members of our church, I know this is happening at the church that Shane's a part of and so many others, hey, we'll meet you online this weekend for worship. So, man, if we dispose of the technology entirely, we miss engagement opportunities. And so we're like, man, 50 years ago, a guy like Shane, or I hope it's okay if I compare this, but a guy like Shane or like Billy Graham is saying, come to the stadium, right? Yeah. Hundreds of thousands. Mm-hmm. Now the stadium may be a pastor's living room, and it's coming back out 100,000 different ways. So we don't have to dispose of creativity. Those things, that creativity and consistency can work together. They don't have to be adversarial, and it helps us be a little bit more intentional with people who might not ever walk in the door, but are really, I just really believe this, are really spiritually sensitive. And I think what we're seeing, and I know we'll get into this more, but I think, man, some of the fear and risk aversion and all these different things we're seeing with coronavirus right now, I think is exposing the hearts of a lot of people where when stuff's chill and cool, I can sort of do what I do. But when things get a little crazy, right, I start to realize, like, man, maybe there's a bigger story here. And if we don't digitally engage, we're going to miss opportunities.
Right. It's definitely a time for searching. And I know I'm not personally wired this way, but I've seen so many people really with if they don't have hope, they're searching right now and they're looking for that hope elsewhere. People are obsessively reading the news feeds and wanting to hear the latest and greatest updated news. And it's almost like that lack of control, the lack of the ability to plan, all of that is kind of coming to a head right now. And I do think it's just a huge opportunity for people in the ministry to reach out and say, hey, we have a hope that's greater than all of this. And it's a hope that regardless of what's going on in this world, we can rely on, and we have stability and know, like, what can the enemy do to me? It's nothing. I have the Lord. I know Psalm 91 is going around right now.
So my pastor preached on Sunday.
I've seen it from so many sources. Yeah. So I'm just really grateful for the opportunity for the gospel right now. We know that in times of difficulty, the church really does prevail. And so especially with some of these logistical difficulties of being able to actually congregate and meet together, I'm personally grateful for technology, but I also know that it gives people, even in my life phase as a young working mom who is home with my kids half the time and working half the time, the ability to even just podcast sermons, things like that just meet me where I'm at. And that's not just a generational thing. That's a life phase thing where it's like, if I can't be in the Word an hour every day, but I can find 20 minutes to have a podcast in the background, that's a blessing to me. So I'm personally grateful when churches really work that way, but I just hate to see churches get too gimmicky or too marketing for the next generation, because it's a miss. And the gospel to me is speaks for itself.
For sure. Yeah. And I think in Tony's article, and we were talking offline a minute ago, I mean, a lot of what Tony's been a blessing to the church is just a lot of creativity and a willingness to call leaders and pastors to think outside that box and challenge and stretch, which we need those voices, and that's good. That article's interesting because if you read towards the end, it's a little anecdotal because he polls his adult age kids and say, what would you guys do? And I think that's a great metaphor for what a lot of leaders are working through right now, where a lot of times we'll talk within our own echo chamber of people we know. Yes. And sort of miss something in our community, or vice versa. We'll guess what maybe is a need in our city and miss the people right in front of us. So I think a great takeaway from what he's saying is don't be ignorant on either side of that. Get engaged and be wise, and think too, as a pastor, what makes the most sense in my context. The people I've been called to shepherd, my radius of influence. What do they need? How can I best serve them? How can I utilize smart tools? I mean, I had a Zoom call last night with 25 of my leaders, and my discipleship ministry space on our team is more baby boomer age folks, along with what I'm doing with millennials. And it was great. Like they were looking at me on a Zoom camera, like, how do I use this? I don't really know, but we're trying, right?
I have been supposed to be on Zoom for like 6 months with work, and I'm still not sure how to use it, but I'm trying. But
I can't go to their house, right? I can't visit them right now, but maybe we could see each other, right? We could talk, we could do life in a different way. So it's got redemptive qualities for sure.
That's a great point. Well, we have to go to one of those breaks after this. But if you want to read these articles, go to pointofview.net. You can read up more on what we're discussing. And after the break, we'll have Representative Matt Krause from Fort Worth with us. Get to hear more from him now that his campaign trail will be on hopefully virtual. See you after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back to the Millennial Roundtable on Point of View. I'm your host, Chelsey Youman, where we're talking about current events, ministry, and we have some special guests lined up today. I'm so excited to introduce our next guest. His name's Representative Matt Krause, and he's out of Fort Worth. I don't know if our listeners have been paying much attention in the middle of everything, but there is still an election going on. So we wanted to make sure that we gave Representative Krause a platform, the ability to talk and introduce himself. So thank you for being with us today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So you are out of District 93. Will you tell our listeners where your district is and just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so House District 93 is in Tarrant County, and I have parts of Fort Worth and Arlington. So if anybody's been to Six Flags or a Cowboys game or a Rangers game, you've been in my district. And so I've been blessed to represent them since 2013 and love doing it, and hope to get another term this next November. But right now, politics is kind of very much on the back burner as we all try to figure out what we're doing during this coronavirus pandemic.
Absolutely. I thought so much of you guys because we still, want as me as a voter, and I know that everybody still wants to be hearing from you and hearing your messages and your platforms, but don't know exactly how to do that with canvassing and things like that. So have you had to change or alter your campaigning at all right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Meet and greet at people's homes, you can't really do that anymore. Going door to door, people don't really want to open the door to a stranger, especially a politician, I would think at this point. So it's really shut down everything. And even some of the daily things that you do politically, you're not doing right now because you're really focused on talking with the county, talking with the city, talking with the state, seeing what we can do to mitigate the damage that's there and also provide solutions and fixes to the problems that people are having right now. So it sounds cliche, but politics is really the furthest thing from most of our minds. We're just trying to help our constituents and our communities get through this time.
Right, exactly. Is there anything you've been able to do specifically in your community or that you would want your district to know if they're listening right now? Any advice you'd give them to get maybe a little bit through this time or while we're all quarantining?
Yeah, that's right. Well, one thing I was able to do last week, which was wonderful, is I volunteered a little bit for Meals on Wheels here in Tarrant County. And so even though people are quarantining, we're supposed to practice social distancing, there's ways we can still be active and involved in our community. And so in your local area, they have Meals on Wheels or other kind of organizations, nonprofits, still reaching out to those very vulnerable communities, those people who can't really take care of themselves at this moment. That's when they need our help the most. So I'd encourage you, if you feel good and you still abide by the rules of social distancing and taking the precautions that we're supposed to, but you can still get involved in the community and help out, I'd encourage you to do that. And then I know it sounds, again, kind of cliche, but make sure you're patroning your small businesses, especially your restaurants, during this time. And they're going through a tough time right now. The governor literally just shut down dine-in restaurants for the foreseeable future. So carry out to go delivery, that's going to be the lifeblood of a lot of our small businesses and restaurants in the area. And so whatever we can do to help support and promote them, let's do that.
That is such a great reminder. I know that I personally am supporting every pizza establishment that I can right now. You can't tell, but I am 7 months pregnant. And so, when I still want to support my local businesses, and we're almost using that as an excuse right now to have delivery people come out to our house and not cook because I am worried. I am worried a little bit about business establishments. And hopefully, we see some light at the end of the tunnel with this in the next upcoming weeks. I know that it's changing day by day, the situation, the advice we're getting, both there's, the national, state and local pay attention to. So I am grateful for that advice, Representative Krause. I did want to go ahead and just ask a few questions, if you don't mind, just give you the opportunity to speak to voters out there about what you represent, what you stand for your district. Is there anything just that comes to the top of your mind that you would say, okay, if I've got 5 minutes to tell anybody about myself and why I'm running for office, what would you say?
Well, I know it's an issue that's near and dear to your heart, but it's the pro-life cause, and the way we can do what we can, not only to protect those innocent, most vulnerable, the preborn children, but also all throughout life till natural death. And so the pro-life issue is one that was one of the animating issues which got me involved in politics in the first place and running for office. And as long as the Lord allows me to stay in office, advocating and promoting pro-life policies is going to be at the top of my list. And also, I think you and I both work for constitutional litigation firms which protected and advance religious liberty, and that's another one of my passions as well. And so those are two of the issues that are kind of at the forefront of my mind every time we go into a session, and that will not change if the Lord allows me to come back for a fifth term after November.
Well, I obviously am so grateful to hear you say that. I know that we've personally met and talked about both of our passions for the pro-life movement and not just protecting preborn children, but also promoting their pregnant moms and supporting their moms and making sure that they have the rescue system in place to make the right decision and to choose life. And so I know you have such a holistic approach to that. It's so authentic, and I'm really grateful for that, of course. But those are great issues. I think, it's easy for voters right now to get sidetracked in a national election and be thinking a little bit more about national politics, and especially right now, obviously the economy. But I don't want those issues that you mentioned, both the fact that you are so pro-life and that you're such an advocate for religious liberty. I mean, those are foundational principles, the right to life, the right to worship, to our society, that those are still, I think and hope, should be, forefront in our listeners' minds. So thank you for mentioning those. I do want you to go ahead and talk about maybe some of your accomplishments from last session. We've got a couple minutes before the break. And, last session we've seen a lot of in the media, not as much lately, obviously, but I would love for you to be able to say, hey, these are things that we passed or voted on that I was really proud of, or that we worked on, maybe even behind the scenes, if you can give us a little bit from behind the scenes, things that you're personally really proud of that you got to do last session.
Sure. Well, one of them people would see as kind of a light thing, but I think it's an important thing. We had I in my office had a lemonade stand law, which basically said that if you are under 18 years of age and you want to run your own lemonade stand, the government cannot fine you, make you have a permit, or go through any regulation or red tape to set up that lemonade stand. Because we've been hearing instances where kids, believe it or not, were actually having their lemonade stand shut down in the state. And there's studies have been shown that the children who start their own lemonade stands when they're younger actually go on to start their businesses at a much higher rate than anybody else. So you really are teaching our next generation of entrepreneurs what inventory is, what profit is, how to market, and how to do all those things, customer service. And so in Texas now, if you are under the age of 18, you can run your lemonade stands without fear of the government shutting you down or having to jump through any hoops. So, again, it's kind of maybe a little bit of a feel-good thing, but I think it actually has a legitimate purpose for the government. And I think we need to continue looking for ways, not just for children, but all of society, to reduce the regulations, reduce the red tape that keeps the free enterprise system from flourishing. Because as it does that, then the better we all are. As we're seeing right now with this pandemic outbreak, is that the private sector is partnering with the Trump administration, and we're seeing lightning fast steps being made to mitigate the damage and hopefully figure this situation out. If it was only the government, I don't think we'd be making as much progress as we have. So the more we can innovate the private sector and allow them to thrive, the better our society and definitely our state will be.
That is such a good point. With the economy, it's so consumer driven. And I think that, we've heard a little bit of warning from General Paxton's office and the governor's office about price gouging and things like that, but at the end of the day, deregulating, allowing these businesses to flourish is going to be really key and foundational to our economy continuing to get back on its feet. And so I'm hopeful that our listeners are out there supporting their local businesses as best as they can. I even saw, in downtown Dallas, one of my friend's moms owns a bakery, and she's doing kits where you can ship them to your houses for your kids to decorate their own cookies right now. Companies are creative, and they're going to find ways around this. So I love seeing the human spirit. I love hearing what you have to say about that. And when we get back, don't go anywhere, listeners. Representative Krause will stay with us on the line. We've got a few more questions to ask him during a time where we might not otherwise get to hear from him. I'm so grateful he's with us today, and we will see you guys after the break.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, welcome back to Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable Edition. I'm your host, Chelsey Youman, and I'm here to talk to Representative Krause, who we have on the line. We got to hear from him a little bit last segment. We're just talking about the campaign trail, but also what he's doing to help his local community through this time. So I'm so grateful for your time today, Representative Krause. How are you today?
Good. Just trying to juggle everything that's going on. I know it's a new normal and a new reality for a lot of people, so we're just trying to figure out the best way to do that And as we talked about earlier, just stay in constant communication with local leaders, state leaders, to see what we can do to help be a part of the solution instead of just finding the problems.
Absolutely. I know if the listeners are anything like me, they're a little bit, our heads are spinning from all of the advice that's changing day to day. The situation is being monitored. And I'm so grateful for how proactive, frankly, as a society, we have been able to be. I'm a millennial, as are the others around the table today, but I kind of remember SARS being a big deal. I was in college at the time, or, we think of these other outbreaks that have happened, but I don't ever really remember a time where as a society, we were functionally able to just take the precautions we've taken and say, okay, we're working remotely now. We're able to be home. We're protecting ourselves, and to do it so quickly. So I just want to applaud the efforts of our public servants, and the fact that as a society we even have the luxury to be able to operate in the way we are. Is there anything that you there in Tarrant County are seeing, or that from the conversations you've been in, that we should be aware of as constituents?
Yeah, and the first thing I'll say is I think times like this gives you an appreciation for the people or the industries you often overlook. While a lot of people are working from home, while a lot of people have shut down, even major sports leagues, events, tournaments, concerts, your truck drivers are still working, your grocery store individuals are still working, your healthcare professionals are still working, and your farmers are still producing. And so I think after this, we're going to have to make sure we do a good job of showing appreciation to those who couldn't work from home, couldn't self-quarantine, couldn't take days off. They've been delivering and doing what they can to keep this country going and our supply chain met even during these difficult times. So we can't give them enough credit. And as far as what to expect in the next couple of days, now we're getting more tests. So it shouldn't shock people when we see the numbers start to exponentially rise on the number of positive results for the coronavirus here in Texas and here in North Texas. What we need to be looking for is, do the fatality rates continue to rise at the same level, or do those stay pretty much at the same ratio, even with the exploding positive tests? So when you hear that there's many, many new cases, that should reinforce to us to do what we can to flatten the curve in social distancing, but that shouldn't catch us off guard, because the reason there haven't been more already is because the tests haven't been as readily available. Now that we have those, the numbers will go up. So, and then again, if you live in Texas, the governor has just said no social gatherings of 10 people or more. Schools are closed at least for the next 2 weeks. Restaurants, you can't go in there for the next 2 weeks for sure. It's only delivery, takeout, and to-go orders, drive-through. So this is going to drastically change the way people live for the next couple of weeks for sure. Hopefully it only is the next 2 weeks, and then we can start to get back to some sort of normalcy. But that's what we're in for the next 14 days at least, and people need to make sure that they know that and then act accordingly.
That's really helpful to know, especially, if you're not able, and you're a listener or me, to keep up every single day with the news coming at us and the directives. That's really helpful to just put that all in perspective for us. What about education? I know that there have been a lot of questions and unknowns about our school system. I think STAR testing was delayed. Do you have any information about the education side of this and what to expect there?
That's right. And like you said, the situation is so fluid. What I would have told you on your program had been on there last week would have been much different than what we're saying today. Mm-hmm. But the governor did hear from a lot of parents, teachers, a lot of lawmakers saying, hey, if we're going to shut down school for any lengthy period of time, which at that point it was about the end of March, then we're going to have to get rid of some of these standardized testing requirements. And the governor was very responsive. He and the TEA commissioner did that, which was really good. But now if we continue to get more cases, if it continues to spread more, we could see ourselves out of school even into mid-April or into May. And at that point, then local ISDs and superintendents and administrators will have to say, well, do we come back for a couple of days at that point, or do we just completely call the school year off and just look forward to the next one? So then again, we could get to the end of April and this pandemic is still wreaking havoc in our communities, and they have to go even further. So I don't think anybody can tell you right now what's going to happen, but what I can tell you is that the governor and his team, the TEA, the local superintendents have all been so responsive, so earnest, so hardworking that they're figuring out the solutions to the problems as they come up. So you can bet that they're thinking about that they're weighing out those factors. Whether we have a complete answer today, will we go back to school? Won't we go back to school? We don't know, but we will get the answers as the issues present themselves. And we'll do our best. In House District 93, and I think my other 149 counterparts in the House and 31 colleagues in the Senate would agree, we will just be feeding you that information as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. So grateful for y'all's public service right now. I know we talked a little bit about this earlier, but we got a minute or two left here, and I just want to make sure you have the chance. I know campaigning, of course, is the last thing on everybody's mind right now, and you, I'm sure, are off the campaign trail. But I just want to make sure that Texans everywhere listening can have the opportunity to hear from you during this time about your campaigning, and if your district has a little bit of diversity in its voting compared to last time, what is it you would like your voters, maybe who are on the fence, to hear from you and know about you as their representative?
Yeah, and honestly, it's counterintuitive as it sounds. I think the best thing you can look for right now is politicians who aren't being political, because that shows that they are working on the needs of their community. And I think many others would agree with me. Regardless of what happens in November, we've got to be present and helpful now. And I'm a big believer in the quote that duty is ours and results are God's. And so right now we just have to focus on the needs of our community and the things that are taking place in this in this time, and then everything else will work itself out, especially politics, which is not nearly as important as everything taking place right now. But if you want to follow what we're doing, get the information from me, you can follow me at Twitter at Rep. Matt Krause, or you can follow me on Facebook. I've got a page on Facebook at Matt Krause. That's where we'll be pushing out all the information, all the opportunities to help and contribute to the efforts there.
Well, thank you certainly for your time today, Representative Krause. I know that it is a crazy time, so we're just so grateful you would take time to speak out about everything going on, give us some encouragement, really, about continuing to pour into our own communities, to serve one another, but also to go towards those establishments. Those local business establishments are so important. So we just appreciate you. Our listeners can go to mattkrause.org if they want to learn more about their representative, or just really, frankly, a great constitutional conservative who serves us every day as a public servant in the House. I'm so grateful for your time and your efforts. So thank you for being with us today, Representative Krause.
Hey, thank you, Chelsey. Look forward to working with you this next session on critical efforts, and appreciate all you do, Human Coalition, and your other endeavors.
Great. Well, when we get back, we hope to hear from everybody, our listeners. If you want to call on the call lines about anything we've discussed, 1-800-351-1212. When we get back, we've got a lot of political discussions to be had yet.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Hi, I am Chelsey Youman, and I am the guest host for Point of View Millennial Roundtable Edition today. I'm sure that the world really wants to hear from lots of millennials right now, so we made sure to have a show lined up, but we've had some great topics. We've discussed already a little bit about the church, and then we had Representative Krause on last hour from Fort Worth, Tarrant County District. And then the next hour, we'll be talking a little bit more about the coronavirus, what that means for you, the stimulus package that the Senate's considering. And we can't forget who's to blame for this mess, which is China. So we'll be talking a little bit about those issues. And around the table, we've got some incredible men in the ministry, also fellow millennials. Jonathan Teague, he's the minister to married adults at Prestonwood Baptist Church. Thanks for being here, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's great to join you, Chelsey. It's really glad to be with you guys and to hang out with Shane and have these conversations today. Yeah, we've had a wonderful season of almost 9 years at Prestonwood, serving there on our discipleship team. My wife, Michelle, and I have been married going on 18 years. We have 4 kids. They're all at home today. They're loving their life. They're learning. They're hanging out. But it's great to be with you guys today.
Great. Well, Shane is also with us. He is Shane Pruitt with the North American Mission Board. Shane, welcome.
Hey, Chelsey. Great to be on. Yeah, Shane Pruitt, National Next Gen Evangelism Director with the North American Mission Board, which the North American Mission Board, or NAM, is the national entity for the Southern Baptist Convention, working with a little over 47,000 churches to reach the nation with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So all over the nation, but call Texas home. So,
that's great. So if any of our listeners have any theological, like really deep theological questions, you can call in. These are your guys for it at 800-351-1212. I'm joking, but I do really appreciate you guys being here with us today. And they're definitely taking the lead on some of our ministry topics of the day. So I've really appreciated that. We are going to shift gears a little bit, and we have our articles posted right now on pointofview.net. Huffington Post came out with an article that talked about basically panicking Americans that abortion was going to be limited during this time, or not, you wouldn't be able to have as much access. It's something I've seen a lot in the news. And in all of my free time, I work with Human Coalition Action, and our entire nonprofit is dedicated to advocating for pregnant mothers who are seeking abortion to help them make a different decision and to choose life, to protect their preborn children. And we do that by coming alongside them with our network of 45 clinics nationwide. And we just ask them, if it was really up to you, what would you choose? Would you prefer to parent or would you prefer to have an abortion? And 75% actually say they would prefer to parent. And I think that's a really important statistic, that 75% of pregnant women seeking an abortion would prefer to parent, but they say because of my circumstances, whether that's domestic violence, poverty, homelessness, whatever the issue may be, they feel like they can't make that choice. And so at Human Coalition, we come alongside the women, we serve them and say, let's stabilize your circumstances and just slow this down a little bit. And, ultimately they often do choose life, which is incredible. So when I see articles like the one that we posted today, I think there's another narrative to be had. And that is right now, the abortion industry thrives on uncertainty, and they thrive on, frankly, scared women or desperate women. And so when you see articles like this, I just like to flag it for our listeners to say, don't believe everything you read. And on our clinic side, I've even heard anecdotally that we've had an uptick in callers who are saying, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. Especially I heard someone, from the airline industry saying with potential layoffs on the horizon, they're more concerned than ever. And that instability in the economy drives increases in abortion. And so I know everyone wants to talk about the coronavirus, which is, of course, is so serious and important right now, but it's impacting a lot, really. And on the life scale, what I really want to see is an increase in life right now, because communities are coming around to support women, because we're aware that uncertainty and fear in the economy is driving perhaps an increase in abortion rates. And so I don't know if either of you, I know, but you both have read the article, but Shane, what do you think about this? I know that you're on the front lines in ministry, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't imagine, trying to put myself in the shoes of a birth mom, birth dad, that you feel that you're in a situation in life where you're having to make that decision, at least in your own mind. You don't have to, obviously, but where they think they have to. I think there are very real issues and very real situations, let's just be honest, where people are making that decision out of convenience. You're right. It's going to disrupt my life or this goal that I have. But then there's other very real issues where people feel like that's the only choice they have. And so I would hate to feel like I am in that position, but anything that limits abortions taking place, I'm for, so, right. I hate that. I hate the situation that we're in. But yeah, I don't feel sympathy for any of those that feel like, oh no, especially those that are overseeing abortion clinics. Oh no, this is going to cut down on our rate of women coming in to receive abortions. I don't really have a lot of compassion for people that have that concern.
Like
yeah, exactly. That's a business I would love to see completely shut down and closed. Right. However, my heart does still, I think my pastoral heart for sure still hurts and is burdened for someone who feels like that's a decision that they're considering.
Absolutely. I know that it's truly a decision made out of desperation in a lot of ways. And I think real women's empowerment is about coming alongside women and allowing them to make the choice they really want to make and enabling them to do this instead of, saying you're not capable of doing this. It's going to be too hard. I think really empowering women is saying, you can absolutely do this. Jonathan, I know Prestonwood has such a robust ministry for pregnant women. So do you mind telling us a little bit about that?
I mean, I'm so glad you said that, Chelsey. And I know there's a lot of people maybe listening today who are a part of churches or church networks. Certainly for us, Shane and I are a part of a great denomination, a tribe of churches called the Southern Baptist Convention. This has been not just a talking point, but a conviction point for our 45,000, 47,000 plus churches for decades now, really since Roe v. Wade. And we are praying and hoping that not only the Lord will move in such a way in our nation where access becomes more and more limited and eventually gone, right? But that there's also a response from the people of God. And one of those places where we've responded in the pro-life movement is not just fighting for those precious babies from the moment of conception, because our God is an author of life, and every person babies, but we're also advocating for what happens to those precious little ones. I know Shane's going to say something about this for sure, but just fighting for those precious little ones outside the womb. And so I've never been more proud of ministries like our pregnancy center that is expanding and growing. Leanne Jameson gives leadership to that. It's a huge important ministry to my pastor, something that's been in his ministry for years and years and years. And so I've had the privilege of those volunteers out there on the front lines today that are meeting with women, that are sitting with the guys in the waiting room, talking and praying with them, sharing the gospel with them, while those expecting moms are in the back, and they're hearing that ultrasound for the first time, and they see that heartbeat, and it just becomes so real. So those are huge ministries. That's
so true. I'm so grateful for the work that Prestonwood and you do. When we get back, we're going to continue the conversation about how the coronavirus is affecting life, hopefully choosing life.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Two of the founding fathers that deserve more attention are Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. While the Hamilton musical provides us with some perspectives and entertainment, I would recommend the book by Jay Cost, The Price of Greatness, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and the Creation of American Oligarchy. He was on the Point of View radio program to talk about his book. These two men belonged to a political movement with three fundamental foundations. The first was the commitment to liberal government that emphasized the protection of individual rights. The Declaration of Independence argued that governments are instituted among men in order to secure certain unalienable rights. That idea, written by Thomas Jefferson, was influenced by the writings of John Locke. The second foundation was a belief in self-government, often referred to as republicanism. A republic allowed the citizens to be governed by laws that they actually had a hand in creating. A monarch did not hand down these laws. They were established by we the people. The third foundation was nationalism. The 13 separate colonies agreed to bind themselves together in a national union of 13 states. This is where there was the greatest division between Federalist and Anti-Federalist, and they ended up dividing Hamilton from Madison. Hamilton emphasized national vigor and was eager to promote the Bank of the United States and other programs that would grow the national government. Madison, on the other hand, wanted to pursue what he called the Republican balance. He feared that Hamilton's policies favored the wealthy. In reading this book by Jay Cost, I was struck by the reality that many of the debates in the founding of this country continue to this day. Many of the ideas put forward by Hamilton and Madison are still debated today in the halls of Congress. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Chelsey Youman, and I'm your host today. And we've got a great roundtable lined up for you guys. We've got Jonathan Teague from Prestonwood. He's the minister to marry adults there. We've got Shane Pruitt with the North American Mission Board, fellow millennials, to give you guys some perspectives. And we're just going to continue the conversation. We've been talking a little bit about the coronavirus actually maybe leading to an increase in women seeking abortions, because abortions are often driven by just uncertainty. And we've got uncertainty in the market, uncertainty about our health, and what's going on. And so we're trying to give a little bit of a different perspective on the coronavirus today, because there's other news out there that's just so important to make sure that we are aware of. And one of those things that I wanted to make sure we talked about is you're going to probably see a push from the abortion industry for telemedicine when it comes to abortions. And so this is something that I often find is kind of like a quieter thing that the abortion industry doesn't always talk about. But there are websites I will not mention on right now. But there are websites out there where women can talk virtually to a doctor who is international, out of the country. The doctor fills the abortion prescription indoors. And so no interaction with a clinic, no interaction with a doctor necessary, no FDA approval. By the way, the FDA is on this and saying, this is illegal. We don't know what's in these prescription drugs. It's dangerous. But that is really the future we've already seen of abortion, is telemedicine abortions. Well, I can see the significant push coming around the horizon for that. And so just make sure you're contacting your local representative, your congressman, and voting on this issue. Those are all calls to action I would really love for our listeners to take note of, because that is the future that we're seeing of abortion. And it's dangerous for a lot of reasons, but mostly these women need care. And that's something we were talking about earlier is my organization. Go to humancoalition.org and see how we are caring for women, coming alongside them during this time. We help women get jobs. We help them get GEDs. Really, whatever the obstacle between the woman and her ability to choose life in her mind is, we try to help rectify and fix and come alongside her as a support system. So go to humancoalition.org. If you are a woman and you're worried about losing your job right now, maybe you already lost it and you are pregnant and you just need help, also go to humancoalition.org. We're there for you. Certainty. We have church community. Really walk you through whatever your circumstances are. I know, Jonathan, that Prestonwood you were mentioning earlier has its own clinic. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'm so thankful for all that you do, Chelsey, in that space. I mean, this is one of those cultural realities where, as Christians, I mean, we got to run into the darkness and we got to shine the light of Christ. And one thing we know, not just as pastors but as believers, is that Jesus was never afraid to go in and rescue those who felt hopeless. He's talking all the time in his ministry about peace, about presence, and that there is something better that you can turn to in your life. But I think Shane said it so well earlier, and I know you said this as well. It's that when that hopelessness grips you, you can feel like there's nobody out there that listens or cares or knows. And so I think one of the things that's so great about pregnancy centers like ours and so many others around the country is that it's a really a light in that neighborhood and in that area to let women know you're not alone, and that you don't have to walk through this journey by yourself, that there's people that want to know you, want to care for you, and want to help you not only make what we believe is the right decision for life and to save that baby and to have that baby, but to love that baby. I know both the churches that we're a part of and the ministries that we're involved in, Shane and I both, and so many others, we know that it's critical now more than ever. We're finding out. I think it's so interesting. I just was thinking about this a moment ago. I think it's so interesting that all of a sudden, kind of overnight, you heard rhetoric just a few weeks ago from folks of a certain political persuasion who were issuing threats from the Capitol steps towards Supreme Court justices about certain decisions. And now almost overnight, because of coronavirus, the narrative has changed, right? And all of a sudden, we're super interested in little kids. We're super interested in our children. We're super interested in parenting and families, where when there's not as much crisis in the space, it seems as almost though like the mindset has changed. And when there's less crisis and more convenience, these are the kind of things that people think about. But now we're thinking about our kids and our families.
Right.
And I just think it exposes the reality of our hearts as people that I don't believe for a second that a mom, that if she knew there was resources and an infrastructure around her to love her, that she would always, every time, still make that choice to say, no, I don't want this baby. We just don't believe that. So
right. And I think it puts into perspective too, just really that we do what you're saying, value life as a society. I mean, that every individual matters. We're talking about deaths in the thousands right now. Yeah. And there's, an international panic, rightfully so. But when you think that 1 million children die in America every year, it's the leading cause of death in America is abortion, leading cause of death. 5 preschool classrooms die every single minute. When you start putting it into perspective of the lives that really are being lost, we have to bring that truth to the surface, because truth ultimately will prevail. And I am so hopeful for this cause. I'm hopeful for preborn children out there that, you're absolutely right, that humans begin to continue to question, why are we freaking out right now? Well, it's because we value life. Yeah. We value those around us as a community. And I know, Shane, that this goes beyond just life in the womb. It's life to the tomb, they say. But, what have you seen in ministry with your ministry about how this is impacting other children in other spheres as well?
Yeah, Chelsey, great question. So my wife is the adoption and foster care ministry coordinator for our church and works with all 6 campuses of our church. And she works very closely with CPS, and so she has shared with me this week through some of her meetings of how this has impacted foster care. If you think about it, with kids being out of school, home more, if they're already in an unstable environment, the risk of things happening just increases, especially if their parents are addicted to things. Isolation is the worst for people that struggle with addictions, and so unfortunately, coronavirus has not stopped the breakdown of family structures. And so there's still a great need, but also understandably, families who are licensed to be foster care families have some fearful things, to consider when children are being brought into their home from situations they don't know anything about. So I do know some foster care families have decided to, in this time, not to open their homes to kids that are in need because of that fear, which is understandable.
Yeah, sure.
But it doesn't alleviate the situation that we're in.
Right,
Yeah.
Shane. That's really important. I think all of our listeners, I mean, they care deeply about these issues. So what can they do? I mean, how can they get involved? Are we encouraging people to try to see if they can become foster parents during this time? Or how can we support, really the underserved among us?
Yeah, definitely. I would encourage you, if you are already licensed to be a foster home, you have to make the best decision you can for your family. I understand that. But I would really encourage you to take time to pray, see about still leaving your home open. The need is extremely great. If you're licensed to be to provide respite for foster care families, still reach out and to foster care families and to see how you can serve foster care families, because sometimes it helps to continue that journey when you know there's a support system around you. And then also pray for our child protective services. If you think about it, they're on some level, they're never anyone's fans. They're not the fans of the family. When you're a CPS agent having to remove a child from a home, you're not the fans of the child, because you're not the fan of the foster care family, because you can't answer sometimes the questions they're asking you. So sometimes they're always on the bad side of people's views, when really most CPS agents that we know deeply love families, they deeply love kids, and they want the well-being of kids. So also, I think that's an aspect of people that we haven't considered praying for in this time.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I'm really glad you're highlighting it, because sometimes it's hard to talk about these things, and I deal with abortion day in and day out. Sometimes I'm just like, it's heavy. It is. And it's sometimes easier as the church to look away or just not think that much about it. But really, this is of the utmost importance in our society. It's our children, it's our preborn children, and the most vulnerable. And so leaning in and looking at these situations, and when we're talking about the coronavirus, understanding what that means for kids who maybe their only meal every day was at school. And so doing Meals on Wheels, Representative Krause talked about earlier this last hour. So not forgetting to just continue to come around as a society and a community during this time for the underserved among us is so important. Well, we do have a break coming up. After the break, Richard Lim is going to be with us. His podcast is This American President. He's a dear, dear friend of mine, brilliant historian, brilliant political mind. So he will have so much insight for us on the coronavirus, where it originated from. I don't know if everyone's heard, but it's from China. Our president's getting a little bit of heat from that. When we come back, we'll hear from Richard Lim. So stay with us, and we'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Chelsey Youman, and we have just an outstanding guest lined up on our Millennial Roundtable right now. His name is Richard Lim, and he's got a podcast, This American President. Richard, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, yes. Thank you, Chelsey. It's great to be on the show. As you said, I have that podcast, and it's where I love to talk about history and the lessons it has, all the relevance that it has for current events. There's a lot of wisdom you can mine from history, so I'm very glad to be on the show.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here. For our audience, Richard and I have been dear friends for years and years. We both interned with, I interned. He actually worked at the White House for the Bush administration. So I don't want to age us as our older millennials around the table, but we definitely have seen a lot in both the conservative movement since President Bush's time to right now. A lot has changed. So I'm really grateful to have you here today, Richard.
Yep, we knew each other way back when, and obviously we have a lot of dirt on each other, but that'll always stay. What happened during the Bush years stays during the Bush years,
Stays
right?
during the Bush years. That's right. Well, Richard, I wanted to have you on today to talk about a little bit about this coronavirus. Just because you do know so much about history, I thought you could really help enlighten us on how different it is today that we have been able to respond both at the national level with the president and the information he has at the local levels with local governments calling the shots. And give us just a little bit of your perspective on what history has to say about how pandemics and outbreaks have gone traditionally in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing we have to keep in mind is that the last time there was anything even close to this was literally over 100 years ago. That was during our grandparents, great-grandparents' generations. And so I think it's not a surprise that we're all a bit flat-footed from this. I mean, we heard about things happening in the world, swine flu, SARS, all that kind of stuff. But in my world, that was happening somewhere else. So it's not surprising to me that this is a very new thing. We Americans were used to having two oceans around us and feeling relatively safe. And so when stuff like this happens, it's something that our government, just like us, takes time to respond to these things. So I think there's kind of an element of patience. But, the other thing I also want to say is that history, a lot of bad stuff has happened in history. And when I started looking up things about the flu, the Spanish flu that happened 100-plus years ago, it was really bad. I mean, the first thing is that the government was actively suppressing information about that particular flu. The president was suppressing information. And the president actually came down with the flu itself. I mean, imagine if that would happen today. Hopefully it doesn't happen today. But it was a very scary thing. And because of what the government did and a lot of other things, back then medical technology isn't what it is today. You had about 700,000 Americans die from that. That's more than died in the war that was going on at the time, World War I, and that's more that died in the Civil War. I mean, it was horrible, and I don't say that to discourage people, but what I want to say is that, these things happen, they're horrible, but we're far better equipped today. There's much more information. The president isn't suppressing things the way President Wilson did, progressive president. Here he is essentially preventing people from even talking about it. The president doesn't have it, thank God. And yet, even at that point, if people felt horrible, America's best days were still ahead of it. I mean, America in the decades after that would go on to be the great global power in the world, would go on to defeat fascism and communism. So I think, we're far better equipped. We're taking precautions. And I think that we should have some sense of optimism that this isn't going to stop us because it didn't then.
That's such a good point. I keep thinking I have friends texting me saying, quick question, what's going on? Like, there seems to be so much information. It changes day to day, but it is absolutely crazy in an interesting way, in an exciting way, that we as a society can react the way we even have this far. So the ability to shut down schools, the ability to talk not just internationally, but to get the information as quick as we are able to get it through media and digital sources. I mean, we are able to really be very responsive as a society. And I know that that's going to save lives, and that's really exciting. You know, I think that SARS was the one happening when I was in college, and we didn't even know much about it. I wasn't hearing much. I was on a college campus. Nobody told me to stay home. I mean, I remember a guy next to me in class one time having a shirt that said, "I got SARS and survived." And we all kind of laughed about it. But really, for us to be able to go on a national lockdown and to have the ability to continue to function and live our lives as families from our homes, I mean, that's really incredible. So it says something for democracy and freedom of information, don't you think, Richard?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I want to say is that even though there's reason for optimism and a lot of things to be thankful for, obviously it's a very serious situation. I'm not minimizing that at all. But yes, I think that one thing that this should teach us, first of all, is that, well, you know, where did this virus come from? It came from China. And, you know, it really shows, if you look back at the Cold War, politicians in totalitarian regimes or just authoritarian regimes, they can hide things as much as they want, but ultimately the system's going to fail. That happened in the Cold War many times. Probably the biggest example is the Chernobyl incident, where they tried to essentially hide a nuclear catastrophe. But there were several events like this, you know, famines break out. They can only do so much. And I think that the United States and our generation really needs to wake up to the fact that China not only is against the United States in the type of world it wants to build, it wants to undermine the world order that the United States has constructed and that's prospered for so long, but also that its system itself poses a threat to us. You know, President Bush, it's not in vogue to say this among millennials, but President Bush would say that things that happen in the world affects us here at home. And in the context he was talking about was terrorism. But look at this. This is a disease that happened in a part of the world that most people can't even point, on the globe. They can't even point on the map. And yet, you know, everyone's been affected by this, by some market, by some, food market in another country in China. And it's personally affecting all of us. So we really have to have our eyes wide open about China. We have to change our supply lines. We need to get serious about this. And I think, you know, in times past, you've had clarity of leadership in this. I'm personally grateful we have a president that's actually been standing up to China. And I think that, you know, people will shrug him off. People think that that's alarmist, but that's leadership, and that's what we need. And we need to wake up to that.
Well, that's such a good point, because we do have this article posted on our website at pointofview.net if our listeners want to read more about what we're talking about. But the coronavirus came from China. We all know that. But I don't think much has been made of that. And the importance is you and I and the others around this table, we're millennials. So we remember the day where we went to other countries because freedom and spreading freedom was important under the Bush administration. And that was a large part of his international relations plan, was to understand that democracy helps society, not as a whole, to flourish, but just also to help protect us, and it insulates us, the freedom of information. And China has been the antithesis of that throughout this entire situation. You know, the National Review article we posted talked about Chinese government destroying samples and suppressing information about the virus. They lied for months, even though they knew it could be spread from human to human, saying that was not possible. They threatened doctors who understood more about the disease, that they had to be quiet. And through their authoritative communist regime, they suppressed information. They threatened and intimidated their own people, because at the end of the day, the Chinese government wants to be the ultimate authority and not take responsibility. And that inaction has led to thousands of deaths, and not just deaths, which are obviously the most utmost importance and severity, but it's crippling our economy so far. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit later about what our government's doing to stop that. But yes, Richard, it's important to note all of those things, because even though, President Bush's freedom agenda is a little bit, as they say, out of vogue, it's still really important for us to look at this and say, when Tom Cotton is tweeting saying they're trying to eliminate, China is trying to stop some of their production of antibiotics and medicine to us, and they're 80% of our medicine market, we need to look at that seriously as a country. We do have a break, but Richard's going to stay with us afterwards, and we're going to continue to talk not only about China and their responsibility for this and maybe how we should react, but also the stimulus package that Congress is looking at right now. And so you can read more about any of these topics at pointofview.net. Don't forget to go to Point of View Radio and like us on Facebook. You can also be watching us on Facebook Live, and we will see you guys right after the break.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm Chelsey Youman, and I'm back at the Millennial Roundtable with our special guest, Richard Lim. Richard Lim has a historical podcast, This American President. It's very fascinating. Always has exciting stories about past presidents and things you might not have known, but always it applies today to current events, because what we know, what do they say? A page of history is worth a volume of logic. So Richard is very, very brilliant on that front, and he's here to talk to us today about the coronavirus, the decisions of the Chinese government and how that's implicating us now. And then hopefully also the stimulus package. Tell us a little bit about that. He's in D.C. now and has just a great perspective. So thanks for being with us today, Richard.
Thank you. Don't talk me up too much now. There's a lot of people much more brilliant than me, of course.
Well, we just appreciate your perspective. We talked a little bit last segment about just not so much for the purpose of blaming China for this virus. Viruses can originate anywhere, but for the purpose it's very instructive on how the difference between a communist regime that's bent on control and having authority and suppressing information really led to implicated so many lives, and so many lives have had to pay the cost for that when they had a lot of information about this virus that they did not share,
right,
and should have. So, Richard, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, the one thing, it's interesting because I'm part Chinese. I'm mainly Filipino. I have some Chinese descent. My stepdad's Chinese. I've been there several times, and I think that one thing that's frustrating is that in this country, in the United States, you often hear people equate criticism of the Chinese government with criticism of the Chinese people. And those two things are totally separate. And I think you saw that when, also as a basketball fan, I'm an NBA fan, I know you are too, there were NBA players that were defending China just a few months ago. Because the owner of the Houston Rockets was criticizing their government and what they did in Hong Kong. And I think, first of all, I just don't think that's helpful. I think we should be able to talk about what a government is doing. We should be able to criticize them, and people shouldn't assume that we're criticizing the people. Again, having relatives there and everything, there are a lot of people in China that don't like their government either. And I think that people can support the people there without supporting their government. So that's something I think is important to distinguish. But, I think it's so important for people to understand the history of China as well. China's been around for so long. They've been around, about as long since ancient Egypt, and they've had this continuous civilization. And obviously they have a lot to be proud of. And when they look at the United States, they essentially see this new kid on the block, and not only the new kid on the block, but the new kid that became the top dog. China's been around for 2,000, 3,000 years. We've been around for 200, just a little over 200 years. And so from that perspective, there's a certain level of pride that comes with that, and some of it is natural, and also a natural sense of competition. But at the same time, when you have a government that it's communist and it's an amoral government, immoral really, it has no incentive to play by the rules. And so right now that's what you're seeing. And not only did they try to suppress disinformation, but people in their government are pushing the narrative that this is actually a U.S. plot. The United States Army planted this disease as a way to undermine China, pin blame on them. And that's what they tell their people. And I don't think that a lot of Americans realize that there's basically this propaganda war going on. I mean, Russia, China, all these, Iran, North Korea, anytime they can concoct something, they do. I mean, that if people think there's fake news here, which there is, they don't even understand the kind of fake news that's going on about us in other countries.
Right. And transparency is just so important to that. Now, Richard, we have a couple minutes left, so I do want to make sure we talk about, I get your perspective on maybe a conservative perspective on the stimulus package that is being passed. Speaking of transparency, the House passed a almost $1 trillion stimulus package last, I think, the 17th. So pretty recently here. It's over in the Senate now. And there's a quick push. So there was not a floor debate. There wasn't time for amendments. I think some of the members, including many Texas members, did not vote for it to pass in the House because they didn't have the chance to debate it and felt that it's going so quickly they didn't even have a chance to read it. But it's a pretty broad stimulus package. So the difference being from the 2009 to even, the Bush era stimulus packages that were passed, is those were pretty industry specific. And here we're having consumer wide suppression. So all industries, we talked about this earlier too, local industries are being impacted by this. And so the goal is to get money back into the consumer's hands so that they can continue to spend it help with child care costs. Families will be getting it. I know that President Trump has looked historically to how unpopular industry bailouts were in the past, and he's trying to really create this in a little bit of a different way to continue to stimulate our economy. And so it's sitting in the Senate floor right now. Richard, what do you think about the stimulus package and the way it was passed? And even from just a conservative perspective, what can our listeners, how can they think about a $1 trillion stimulus?
Yeah, well, I guess honestly, from the conservative perspective, I would say that it doesn't make a lot of sense. I think that from a political perspective, it makes a ton of sense because right now people are hurting, and naturally they're going to look towards the federal government for that. I think that my hope is that, first of all, it's a lot better than kind of the add-ons that the Democrats are trying to push on. They're trying to basically force job guarantees and, things of that nature, paid like permanent medical leave and all that kind of stuff. And I think that the president needs to stand strong on that. I think that the president honestly should focus more on dealing with the emergency as is, making sure that the states and the federal government, local government and businesses, you have not just a whole, as the administration says, not just a whole of government approach, but a whole of America approach. I think that that's all the right stuff. I mean, honestly, a lot of what will solve this situation aren't those spectacular legislative achievements, but it's kind of honestly just doing the dirty work of getting testing kits everywhere. And there have been good examples of that in South Korea and other countries of how they've handled that. So in my opinion, I think that there should be a greater focus on kind of those quiet, unspectacular ways of protecting people. It's not as exciting to tell people to stay home or whatever, and people are saying flatten the curve and all that kind of stuff. It's not as exciting, but I think in the end that's what's going to work. Big legislation like this, honestly, it'll drive up the debt. I think it could help people, but that's when you get the government in the business of picking winners and losers, and that's very tricky. So, I think it's hard as a conservative to square with that. I think that the administration is doing many things in addition to that. So I hope that they focus more on those kind of quiet ways, less spectacular, but more sound ways to deal with this problem.
That's right. Richard, we're about to head into a break, but I think you bring up such a good point. Even though they are trying to keep it kind of consumer centered, which I think is maybe their pitch at keeping it conservative, it's just moving really quickly. I know that the House isn't even in session right this moment. 2 House members have been confirmed to have coronavirus, so we'll see if they're even there to vote this through or how quickly they can get that to happen. But at the end of the day, there are just so many practical ways that we can just eliminate that curve you were talking about by staying home, listening to what the governing officials have to say. Well, Richard, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your perspective, and your historical perspective is more than mine. I loved history, but not as much as you. So if you guys want to hear more from Richard, his podcast is This American President. I highly recommend it. And then stay with us because we still have some exciting topics to talk about when we get back from the break.
(2020). Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Chelsey Youman, and I'm hosting your Millennial Roundtable today, where we're talking about current events, current issues from a millennial perspective. And I have a few brainiac millennials around the table with me. I've got Jonathan Teague, he's the minister to married adults at Prestonwood Baptist Church. So welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, Chelsey. It's great to be with you guys today. Thanks for having us. Yeah, we've had a blessed journey to be at our church now for almost 9 years, and my wife Michelle and I have been married for almost 18 years. We have 4 kids. They're all home today and doing learning at home right now. But it's a blast. It's great to be with you guys.
Well, thanks for being here. And then we also have Shane Pruitt, who's with the North.
Here, and I just want to say I think Chelsea's doing an amazing job as our host.
She's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And Jonathan, she said,
Don't
we're
stop.
here to bring in the Jesus juke. That's what she said.
Yeah. That's the only play we got. That's all we got. Yeah.
I did.
We'll
I'm
do our
so
best.
grateful for them, because they're in the ministry, and y'all know I love politics and can talk politics all day long.
Sure.
But sometimes I don't always remember the exact verse that we should be referencing in the moment. So that's what you guys are here for. But we've had a great show, great lineup today. We've talked a little bit about just the church and how much or how little they should or shouldn't pander to younger generations. We'll probably revisit that again at the end of the hour. But we've also talked, of course, about the coronavirus, the impact it's had on maybe increasing demands for abortion during this time with uncertainty. And then, of course, China and the stimulus package that Congress is currently considering. So if you want to read about anything we've talked about, you can go to pointofview.net, where our articles are posted. But you can also watch live. You can watch at Point of View Radio on Facebook, Point of View Radio, and see our shining faces live. And of course, on YouTube as well. So that's a little bit where we've been and where we're headed today. We did talk about the stimulus package, and that its primary focus, I think, from a conservative perspective, even different than the Bush administration stimulus package, which were largely industry bailouts. And those were, just so our listeners know the numbers, a little bit of the numbers game comparison here. I think it was like $700 billion in Bush's administration and $800 billion with President Obama. And so a $1 trillion stimulus is about on par. It's in the same ballpark as the other stimulus packages we've seen. But one big difference is, and of course, President Trump is looking to learn from a political standpoint from his predecessors, is making sure that cash actually gets in the hands of Americans and the consumers. And so that was criticism we saw earlier in our lives of other presidents, is just industry bailouts, whether that was the automobile industry. I mean, here, they're careful to say, we're not sure what we're doing with airlines yet, but making sure that actually they're talking about direct checks to consumers, to our pocketbooks. And there are conservative arguments to be made of that. I mean, Jonathan, do you have anything that this brings to mind for you?
Well, it's really interesting because I was already married with a second kid on the way in 2008. And so I was a homeowner, and I kind of understood what was happening. And then as that year unfolded, it started to come into clearer focus, right, of what all the implications and the fallout in the market in places like California and like that were. And so now, for those of us that spend a lot of time talking and teaching to particularly young adults or writing about it, and it's one of those kind of really seminal moments generationally, the 2008 recession. In fact, I was talking with a group of SMU graduate students not long ago about this, and if you were to poll all the 5 generations right now kind of in our country, I think Pew Research did this, 9/11 and the 2008 recession chart in all 5 generations as the most important days. Now, these are people that lived in the Kennedy assassination, the moon landing. Like the 2008 recession is more significant in people's psyche than landing on the moon. So it starts to really put into focus where young adults that were maybe in college 10, 12 years ago and were aware, millennials that were aware of the recession, now they're watching a different kind of bailout. I know we don't like to use that word, but it's a version of what it is. I mean, 100 years ago, the government didn't do this. They didn't. So, like, if you lost your job, there was no FDIC. There was no supplemental resource to help you get paid. You just were homeless, right? I mean, we wrote American classics, like The Grapes of Wrath is about this. And so I think it's one of those things. We've been watching a lot of Frozen 2 this week, just real talk as dads.
Congratulations. It came out 3 months early, I heard, before this time.
Disney Plus got real and said, let's make it happen. But, Anna comes out of the cave towards the end. My daughters will so love I'm saying this. But, and she says we got to do the next right thing. And I think in a lot of ways that's what from top down in our nation right now, whether it's the president, and we don't want to minimize the gravity of these decisions, but honestly, as leaders, when you strip away all of the rhetoric, it really is about like, what's the next right thing? Because there's a level of this that's unprecedented. And so a lot of it comes down to how can we help the most people in the most effective way? And as conservatives, we don't get really, really excited about the government writing a check to everybody at once. But the alternatives are kind of staggering as well.
Right. And just to put it in perspective, what they're trying to avoid, and, I always want to be careful not to be making liberal arguments like, oh, for this specific purpose, it's a special exception to make government huge. But they are anticipating potentially a 20% unemployment rate because of all of this. And to put that in perspective, the Great Depression was between 30 and 40% unemployment, and 2008 was 10%. So greater recession than 2008, which you were alluding to being, obviously staggering to many of our lives. But I think that's a little bit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, when I think back at 2008 as well, I feel like what brought on a lot of issues in 2008 was, let's be honest, irresponsible decisions, And then here's the coronavirus, where we were alluding to China a while ago and probably irresponsible decisions by another country. But for some aspect, you can't foresee this. You know what I mean? On some level, you can't look and go, okay, the development of a virus pandemic is this person's fault, and so you can't really plan for a pandemic, I guess doomsday preppers would disagree with that, but
they've got their stocks. So now.
Exactly. So I feel like this is a little different, and so I think you can look at all aspects, including, lack of a better term, the bailout or the emergency stimulus, and go, okay, are we overreacting? Who knows? But if we underreact, everyone will know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you can't penalize people for getting a virus. That's not, to Shane's point. Yeah. It's not the same thing as going, I'm going to write a massive loan I can't afford. And just see what happens. And again, it's not to diminish any of these things, but that's a great way to look at it as well. And so many young adults, I think, in and out of the church are watching how our government handles this. And really, it's really changed in the last 50 years. How do people view the narrative and the place of government in our lives? And so where 100 years ago, the church and nonprofits and even parts of social justice, if you will, that supplemented what government didn't really think it needed to do. But now that script is reversed, and young adults really are watching and looking, going, where is my government's, what role should it play, and how is it going to help me in this journey? Because it's not my fault I got coronavirus or am exposed to it. Yeah. So how does the government play a role in my life?
Or even if I didn't get it and I'm working for an hourly wage and I'm told not to come in, and now I'm not getting paid.
That's real. Yeah,
that's so right. Well, we've got to go to a break, unfortunately, but when we get back, we'll continue to talk about the role of the government in the coronavirus, and also how it's just impacting us daily. So stay tuned. We'll be back after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Two of the founding fathers that deserve more attention are Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. While the Hamilton musical provides us with some perspectives and entertainment, I would recommend the book by Jay Cost, The Price of Greatness, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and the Creation of American Oligarchy. He was on the Point of View radio program to talk about his book. These two men belonged to a political movement with three fundamental foundations. The first was the commitment to liberal government that emphasized the protection of individual rights. The Declaration of Independence argued that governments are instituted among men in order to secure certain unalienable rights. That idea, written by Thomas Jefferson, was influenced by the writings of John Locke. The second foundation was a belief in self-government, often referred to as republicanism. A republic allowed the citizens to be governed by laws that they actually had a hand in creating. A monarch did not hand down these laws. They were established by we the people. The third foundation was nationalism. The 13 separate colonies agreed to bind themselves together in a national union of 13 states. This is where there was the greatest division between Federalist and Anti-Federalist, and they ended up dividing Hamilton from Madison. Hamilton emphasized national vigor and was eager to promote the Bank of the United States and other programs that would grow the national government. Madison, on the other hand, wanted to pursue what he called the Republican balance. He feared that Hamilton's policies favored the wealthy. In reading this book by Jay Cost, I was struck by the reality that many of the debates in the founding of this country continue to this day. Many of the ideas put forward by Hamilton and Madison are still debated today in the halls of Congress. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm Chelsey Youman, and I'm here hosting the Millennial Roundtable. Today we've got a couple great guests. Jonathan Teague, who works with married adults out at Prestonwood Baptist. I'm sure actually we could use plenty of marriage advice from you right now if they're stuck at home with no advice. He's just shaking his head.
If there was ever a time for us to lean into all those conferences and books we've written and done over the years, this is it.
Yeah. Yes. We also have Shane with the North American Mission Board today. How are you, Shane?
Doing well. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking a little bit just about what else, the coronavirus, but just what we can do in small ways. We talked about the stimulus package that Congress is considering right now, and like those are some big answers. But there's just some really practical things too that we've all been working towards, which is staying at home. I know my husband and I are both working from home with our two toddlers under 2. Well, now they're 3.5, but it's been pretty fun. I've enjoyed the time. I don't know if everybody would describe it that way, but it is kind of fun to hunker down as a family and try to figure this out together. But are there anything you guys have done that to hunker down?
Man, when we joke, but really, I was thinking about this. I was talking to some friends about this the other day, Shane. Just, it is interesting from a ministry church perspective, which is where so much of our life takes place, and I know probably a lot of listeners as well. It is funny, though, to think the irony of it all. I mean, just all the conferences, the books, the podcasts that we've been consuming over the years in church life. And it's really interesting now. God's afforded us, to whatever degree of theology you want to take on this, but real is real, right? So being at home, being present with your kids, with your spouse and all of that, a space has been created for us as believers to really live it out. And sort of that John 15 principle of, there's some fruit-bearing opportunities going on right now. I was speaking to a large gathering of our men this past Friday, and we were talking about how, this can be a season where we kind of retreat and run away, or it can be a season where we lean in too far in the wrong ways. It's sort of like a Proverbs and Philippians moment existing together, right? Like lots and lots of wisdom, but then also, what does Paul say? Consider others better than yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like we got to hold both, whether we're in our home or whether we're driving through Chick-fil-A this morning and, you know, high-fiving one of our guys. It's a young single at our church. And I mean, he's at work today. That's how he's turning his lights on. And so, like, how can we balance that presence, I think, is a big deal, and love well and neighbor well during right now. That's something our family's talking a lot about.
That's a great point, because, you know, we've also talked a little bit about there tend to be like two reactions, the underreact and the overreact. And, you know, we all have that person we know that like is just perusing the internet constantly for the latest news and obsessing over it, which we can't control, right? It's horrible circumstances, but what we can control is our own actions. So Shane, I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. Hate the reason why you're having to on behalf of the North American Mission Board. So I was just telling Jonathan during one of the breaks, in the last 5 weeks I've been in. It's good to be home, a lot of family time. But, you know, also we found that my wife and I immediately have become homeschool teachers, you know, because our kids are at home. Yeah. So, you know, one thing that I've thought about too is that if we're complaining that Bible and prayer is out of school, it is completely our fault now, you know, because immediately we get to bring the Bible and prayer back into school, right?
That's right, man. That's right.
You know, all throughout church history, Christians were typically the ones identified because when a pandemic hit, this is not the first time in history, right? Christians were usually the ones running into the city to serve as others were leaving the city for safety, you know? And so I think there is a healthy, like, hey, if you're sick, if you're got compromised immune systems, hey, take care of yourself, isolate yourself. However, you know, I think as Christians, we need to keep our hands washed, but also open and ready to serve, you know, and we operate in faith and not fear. And this is a great opportunity. It's a unique circumstance, but it's also a unique opportunity to be the church. And I actually tweeted this out about 2 days ago. It's a great time in history to show culture that the church really has no walls.
That's right.
That's right.
We've talked about this a little bit before on the show too, just that, you know, we as Christians are a little bit more comfortable with things being out of our control because we know like this is not our home, right? And that's the truth. The truth is we have a hope outside of this. And we talked about an article today. The Gospel Coalition posted an article that C.S. Lewis actually years and years ago wrote something that I think is really encouraging and applicable to us during this time. Although it wasn't a global pandemic that he was speaking to, he was talking about the atomic bomb. And it sounds like, for me, millennial, I wasn't there. I don't remember what the response would have been, especially by Christians, to something like that novel and large and scary. But he said at the end of the day, our first action is to pull ourselves together. If we are to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it finds us, find us doing sensible human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, and chatting to our friends. And essentially his point being that it can't dominate our minds. We have a life to live. And I think, Shane, you bring up such an important point about service, that there are, thinking about it, we talked a little bit earlier about foster kids and how they're impacted by this. And many children's best meal of the day is at school. Well, when schools are shut down, how can we help? Representative Krause has been volunteering with Meals on Wheels and making sure that people are getting the meals they need. So there's just some really practical things. Jonathan, do you have any ministries or action items that we could do as Christians that are just like really practical during this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think Shane and I both are a part of incredible church families where early on our pastors were both signaling and encouraging our teams and our staffs and our people to say, hey, we got to be wise. We need to do the smart things to not spread. We need to be good neighbors. It's interesting, supplementally, I was reading, even coming in this morning, right now, a couple of different articles that are getting that are right now contracting coronavirus the most, because some of them are really struggling to socially distance. And gosh, that I don't, this is probably for a whole nother day, but man, the whole reality of social distancing, like Millennials wrote the book on that, man, because that's what social media is, right?
Yeah.
Social media is invented by Millennials. Google is a Millennial invention. Facebook is invented and curated by a Millennial. Right?
You're welcome, world.
Right,
But
Like,
just so many great things.
So far, that's our gift to the world. So maybe a Millennial will create the vaccine and we'll redeem ourselves. But there's a lot of knocking going on in Millennials in particular. But like social distancing, that's what social media is. And so this idea that, I mean, major spring break parties were still going on. The president even had to speak to that a little bit. And just this idea that where does all of this coalesce for us, both adults young and old, as it relates to staying connected in the right way, right? And so honoring what we're being told so that we don't unnecessarily spread and infect each other. But at the same time, using video-driven. I mean, what a great time to be alive as a believer in so many ways, because we can digitally engage and connect with one another. It's not our primary way. It's not our favorite way. It's not a way that we're hoping will replace the gathering of the body. We don't want to do that. But, man, to be alive right now where pastors and preachers can preach and teach live to people, hundreds and thousands of people. A guy like Shane can get broadcast out to all over the world, theoretically, with the gospel. And then I think, too, Chelsey, how small groups of believers can stay engaged to care for one another, call each other, FaceTime each other, talk to one another, even if church. Early on, several days ago, several of us became aware of the tens of thousands of children in the Denton County, Collin County, Dallas County school system. It's over 150,000. Many of them are on meal assistance programs. And so pretty early on, I was so excited to see our missions team got really, really, really proactive about ways that our members can contribute supplies and food in various ways to get dropped off and then sent out. Jeff Leach, one of our state representatives, is a member of our church. He's been on the front lines of making this happen along with guys like Representative Krause. And so I just think this is the time for the church to shine, man. I really do. Be hands and feet of Jesus like never before, even if it's digitally. We can do it. We can do it really, really well.
I think that's such a good point. Shane, have you seen something similar in your ministry?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I love what Jonathan said, especially on the digital aspect. And I know just the stats from our church alone. You know, typically we'll have about 13,000, spread across our 6 campuses that are in person gathering with us on a weekend to worship. And this weekend, doing everything online, there was over 31,000 that watched the services live. You know what I mean? And so here's one good thing, and here's a great Jesus juke for you, Chelsey. Is you can't.
What you're here for?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You can't quarantine the gospel.
Amen. Yeah,
right. You can't stop
that's
it.
Right.
And all throughout history, in dark situations, the gospel always shines the brightest. And I was thinking about this time in my quiet time this morning of, God's not trapped by time and space. So it's crazy to think that God's already on the other side of this. And at the same time, very right now and present with us, leading us to where he's already at on the other side of this in victory.
That's right. That's it. I mean, that's such a great biblical perspective for any storm that we're in.
That's right. Yeah.
We've got to go to a break right now, but you can go to our website at pointofview.net and read up on both of these great men in ministry, as well as the articles we've posted. So stay with us. We'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back. I'm Chelsey Youman, and I'm hosting today's roundtable. We've got some great topics lined up. But who is with Prestonwood Baptist. Welcome, Jonathan. Thanks for your time today.
Great to be here with you guys.
Yep. And Shane Pruitt, who is with the North American Mission Board, which hopefully someday I won't have to just keep reading that because it's kind of a mouthful. But thank you for being with us today, Shane.
It is a mouthful. It's an honor. And hey, it's such a privilege just like gleaning from y'all's wisdom, and we are somewhat practicing social distancing in the studio still. You know, we're all separated.
Yeah.
We're okay.
I know this is like my first time out in a week. I actually put on heels. I'm 7 months pregnant, so I really wanted to try for today. But we are talking about the coronavirus and how it's impacted us, but also just some wisdom from the past, which is C.S. Lewis wrote an article. At the time, it was talking about the atomic bomb and how everybody was reacting to that and panicking about that. And his wisdom to Christians was, do what you need to do, but largely go about your life and be the church. And so we're going to continue that conversation now. And I think that, Jonathan, you just brought up such a great point about what does it look like for the church to be the church right now in a time where we're not supposed to be with each other?
We were talking about that whole issue of generosity, right? Mm-hmm. And I was just sharing a story with you guys about I was with a group of graduate students not long ago, and we were having this whole conversation about what is the role of the church and does it still have value. So many young adults have kind of drawn that conclusion on their own. Even in our denomination, we know the numbers are not kind to the number of young adults that maybe were raised in the church but have kind of walked away. We even have a whole category of millennials, right? The spiritual nuns, which I always, anytime I'm with a young adult and they kind of share that that's their disposition, I kind of laugh in my mind because I'm like, that's still a spiritual disposition, man. Like you can't be unaffiliated and be unaffiliated. That's still, it's like the atheist that says I have no more.
Right, you still have a belief system.
Right, yeah, it's a false conclusion. But it's sad at one point, but then I was thankful the Lord gave me an encouragement to a young lady who said, I will never give $1 to the church. I will never support a ministry because all churches do is take from people, and it's just pastors getting rich. And I was so thankful to be able to tell her, well, actually, I know a lot of Christians that don't live that way. Mm-hmm. And I've been a part of a lot of churches growing up where that was not what we believed or the things that we did. And I just think with so much cynicism and skepticism amongst young adults who would say, man, the church institutionally is just there for itself. It's not there for anybody else. I just think what a wonderful, we don't wish these circumstances. This is what we would have asked for, but these are our times, right? It's like the men of Issachar, right? In First Chronicles, that they understood the times. And so we understand as believers, we have a window right now of opportunity to really reinforce words we use all the time as communicators, like authenticity, transparency. Well, here it is, church. Like, here it is, Christian. Here's your chance to prove that you're going to trust God through difficult times, and you're still willing to be open-hearted and open-handed in giving. And I think that just speaks volumes to a generation of young people who would say, man, I just don't think that's what religion does. Well, I would agree, but Christ following changes your whole life.
Right. And, I just think of this so much, especially in the context of my job at Human Coalition Action, where I'm advocating on behalf of women who think that their only option is maybe an abortion. And we're trying to say, hey, we can come alongside you, support you, and help you choose life. There's so much work to be done. And that's what I'm always saying. And I see it all the time in my ministry. I know you see it in your ministry. And this kind of crisis that we're in forces us to see that, how interconnected we are. We are and how much work there is to be done. And one thing we tried to do for our listeners, if you weren't tuning in earlier, tune in and listen, because we've talked about just different outcomes of this virus on society. We've talked about the child care system, the foster care system, the abortion. We've talked about Meals on Wheels. I mean, there's a lot of ways that this plays out that you should probably think through and see, what can I do? And we even talked a little bit too about the break that this doesn't just have to be in like a formal ministry context. Like, can you pay child care an extra month, even though that's going to be hard because it'll help maybe a teacher keep their job? Or what does generosity look like outside the box right now? For me, I eat a lot of pizza right now, so we're still trying to do that. But not to make light of it, but there are some ways to continue living maybe while respecting, of course, the situation that we're in. Shane, do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just being a good neighbor. I mean, isn't that the great commandment? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And talk about a great opportunity to really love your neighbor. And I'm thinking like literally your physical neighbors. If you're healthy and maybe there's some senior adults living in your neighborhood, checking on them, offering to go to the grocery store for them. Many of them are very fearful at this time, or they're taking medications that compromise their immune system, and just run into the grocery store for them, or run into the drive-through for them. That's a great opportunity. Also, I can't help but think about those that struggle with bouts of depression. Isolation is the absolute worst situation for someone who struggles with depression. So if you have a friend, loved one, family member that struggles with depression, call.
Some people might be a little worried about that, how awkward that could be. But there's an app that my group of friends, we're all extreme extroverts. So social distancing, I can assure you I've never done in my life. But there's an app called, I think it's called House Party, and you can join it. And they have games on there that you can play. Yeah. It's a lot like FaceTime, but you can have as many people as you want. And you can just like do small things like that would help just somebody not feel as bored and alone right now.
Yeah, I've been showing my 13-year-old what's up on that game on Battleship. I've been taking her out on Battleship. We've been playing lots of Battleship on there. That's a great app. Yeah. I've been saying, Yeah, and and another thing my wife really kind of brought up that I really didn't stop and consider is also being a good neighbor is like when you go to the grocery store, just get what you need.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Like, because when we stockpile and doomsday prep, then we're not being considerate of the person coming into the store right after us. That maybe they don't have anything and they're just trying to get daily food.
And when we're
we're stockpiling, we're really, if we be honest, by practicing doing that, we're mainly considering ourselves and not our neighbors.
And a lot of that, so much to such a degree of that, a lot of it becomes based in fear. A lot of that, we start to become afraid, and that's real. And I think one of the things we've got to do, I know this as pastors, this is a high sensitivity for us, is it's okay for us to acknowledge people's fears, people's loneliness, people's depression, people's addiction issues right now. Man, I mean, you're seeing worldwide. Really nefarious companies, their stock and their revenues going way up as people go into isolation, and they're running you as sin and sin tendencies. And they're finding false remedy there, and we know that's not a gospel remedy. And so I think to Shane's point, there's so many creative things. It's so cool to watch what churches, and I want to emphasize this again. It's so awesome to watch the people of God and the Church of Jesus Christ be on the tip of the spear of creativity and engagement on this, and just to see that it's not rhetoric, it's not religion, but it's life. It's because my life has been changed by Jesus. And I just want to say, like, if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're sad or lonely or afraid or scared, like, just know that there's what's most likely, especially in America, we're grateful for this. There's probably a church down the street from you that loves you and wants to know you. And there's a God that loves you and wants to know you and wants to save you, that this is not all that there is. I love something we're doing right now on our staff, Chelsey. Our team right now this week, all of our discipleship pastors got a list of over 1,000 senior adults in our church. And there's probably more. This is just the first group we know of. And we're literally going name by name. I've got a block of 15 names that I've been assigned to call. And we're not just going to leave voicemails. We're going to call them, to Shane's point, until we have a conversation with them. And what we want to find out is, how can we love you? How can we pray for you?
Right.
Are you okay? Is your family okay? And then how can we serve you? Like, if there's diagnostic questions to ask right now, that's what some of them are. Like, if you're a believer out there, what can I do? And just find out. Talk to somebody. Find out, how can I pray? What do you need? Are you okay?
I love hearing that, because I'm creative, but I'm not always that creative. And so that's just such a tangible, practical way that we can just do what we should be doing, which is like being a good neighbor and being kind and keeping in mind those who maybe are vulnerable among us. So I appreciate you saying that. For our listeners, we're about to go to a break, but don't forget to go to not Prestonwood. That's where you're from, Jonathan. Pointofview.net, and you can hear more about what our topics today. If you have anything you want to say or contribute, call at 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'd love to hear your perspective on really anything we've talked about today. We've hit a number of topics, but we'd love to hear from you. And at the end of the day, go ahead and like our Facebook page. Point of View Radio is our Facebook page, so you can like it. We're live there.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Chelsey Youman, and we are rounding out our Millennial Roundtable for the day. I'm here with Jonathan Teague and Shane Pruitt, who have been giving us lots of scriptural wisdom, more than I could give, but they've been really helpful to help us talk about just different ways as a community we can serve one another during this time, as a church, be the church. And just there's so much to be done. What does generosity look like? All of those questions. And Shane, you had such an interesting point over the break about this website that is going to help people pray for each other. Do you mind introducing that to our listeners?
Yeah. One of the great initiatives that we have currently at the North American Mission Board is called Who's Your One? And the idea is having one person that does not know Jesus or is far from God that you can begin to pray for by name every day, intentionally pursue a relationship with that person to be able to present the gospel with them. You know, especially in this time, some of us have maybe more time on our hands than we normally do. There's a lot of fear and confusion out there. So this is a opportune time to show someone the love of Jesus and present the gospel to them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you'd go to who'syourone.com, just WHOSYOUR, ONE, who'syourone.com. And my favorite thing on there is there's a map, an interactive map. So as we're social distancing and maybe feel disconnected, you can join literally a movement of nearly, at this time, 26,000 people who are praying for someone by name every day. So there's a place there where you can put the person's first name, the city they're in, and then click the button, commit to pray, and then just see that map light up. And I love it that it's lighting up, literally showing salt and light, the light of the gospel going forth. And, you know, you think throughout history, every great awakening or every great revival usually had certain aspects in play, usually some kind of crisis, and then prayer movements. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so usually prayer in the midst of a crisis usually leads to some kind of movement of God, and who knows what God will do and continue to do through this time. So yeah, who'syourone.com, join the movement, commit to pray for someone every day, and watch what God would do in that. I love it.
Yeah, that's incredible. So we talked about ways we can serve each other, ways that we can be praying for each other. But let's shift now, because we are millennials, everyone around this table. But I'm going to just be honest with our listeners. We're bad millennials. All of us are married. All of us have multiple children. So we're pretty committed.
Skewing the data.
Yeah, we really are.
Right.
But all that to say, we finally reached the age where I feel like we can harp on the younger generations for once, because we were used to getting it. Okay, from
those youthins.
Yeah. So it's time.
We graduated up to that chair of judgment. So exciting.
I know. I know. So we're going to talk about some Generation Z, which, Shane, I know you do a lot of ministry with Generation Z. First of all, my first question is, how old is Generation Z? Because I'm not even sure what age that represents.
Yeah. I would say, you know, and of course, it's just like millennials, right? I mean, you can read 10 different articles. There's going to be 10 different definitions of time frames of what millennials fall under. Same thing with Gen Z. The way I describe it now to churches is that it's anywhere between preteens and those in college. So I would say, you know, 22 to probably 10. Mm-hmm. I would say 10 to 22 if you're in that age range. That's Gen Z. Or if you have a child or grandchild in that range, it's Gen Z. And it's interesting that they're being called Gen Z. And, of course, we know there was Gen Xers, and then millennials were Gen Y or millennials. Mm-hmm. Some cultural experts, you know, however you get that title, has said that Gen Z may be the last generation that is defined by a generational name. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is because culture and technology is changing so fast, it'll be almost impossible to lump a whole generation together as defining characteristics. So it'd be interesting to see. Yeah. But
I'm going to personally feel a shortcut if that's the case, because as millennials, we've had to hear it for a long time.
Gotta have the label. Well, and two, the generations are so global now, too.
Yeah, exactly.
So Shane's right. I mean, there is this massive dialogue, really an argument going on amongst sociologists about, can we even label our generations? Like the next youngest after Z would, I guess, be the alphas, but they don't really even know yet, like if how definable that is, because they're all of those cultural distinctives of Eastern and Western and language, that's all going away, particularly with the youngest kids and people in culture in our churches.
Yeah. And, you know, and one thing I would say, too, with Gen Z is I think with the changes characteristics with Gen Z, but some of the things that we harp on with millennials and Gen Z are the exact same things that were said about every other previous generation when they were young, too. You know, I can't help but think of a New York Times article from 1976 that said this: the now generation has become the me generation. And they were talking about boomers. And so, so it's funny that they said now the millennials are the me generation. Gen Z is the me generation. They just care about themselves. And so they've said the exact same things about every other previous generation.
Yeah.
I think there's just something to be said about being young. Right.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, and here's the Jesus juke for this segment. All right. Is that at the end of the day, when you read Genesis through Revelation, you're not going to find terms like baby boomers and Gen X and millennials and Gen Z. You just see people made in the image of God that desperately need the gospel and that need to be discipled.
Well, Shane, we did talk a little bit earlier about, what churches the debate between how much or how little do they change or make an effort to reach out to that next generation or the younger generation. And you had an article that came out that we've put on pointofview.net for our listeners who want to read about it. But what are some of the common traits that the Gen Z has, and what can you say to other churches or people who want to know how to interact well with the Gen Z?
Yeah, that's great. So the way the article came together is typically kind of like the articles we read earlier is usually the way articles are set up or books is it's usually older, generations are telling other older generations how to reach the next generation. So I wanted to kind of flip that script. And so I took last year of traveling and speaking and being around tens of thousands of college students and a ton of high school students and said, hey, I'll be the student. You tell me how to reach your generation. And so these 7 kind of characteristics were really what Gen Z told us how to reach them, And so just kind of a couple of those is, number one, they want to be seen as people, not projects. And so if you're saying, hey, we're going to shift our church to like kind of what we were talking about earlier, to be a next gen church, then all of a sudden they feel like, if you wear skinny jeans and have a shoe game, great. But you don't have to wear skinny jeans and have a shoe game to reach the next generation. Just be you. I think for Gen Z, there's nothing worse than someone trying to be someone they're not to be relevant to their generation. They see right through that. Another thing I would say, too, is that they're not ageist. Jonathan said this so well earlier about the next generation desperately needs the older generations, And if you think about it, often, especially Gen Z today, many of them identify more with their grandparents than they do even their parents. Some of that is because they're being raised by their grandparents, That's right. And just because, honestly, even though they're close in age, millennials and Gen Z are extremely different. In fact, Gen Z is probably a lot more like Gen Xers and boomers than they are their millennial parents or their millennial older siblings,
Yeah, I thought it was interesting in your article because you talked about they've been exposed to more at this age. Than, we kind of had it a little bit cushy in a sense. I mean, we did have, some things happen. We had 9/11 and that, but for the most part, we didn't have a draft. We didn't have a world war. We didn't have a Korean War. Jonathan, I mean, do you feel like the level of exposure is higher?
No, I totally agree with Shane, and we're seeing more and more of those distinctives become more pronounced. That's going to have so many implications. For instance, in 2030, 75% of the workforce is going to be millennials. And so as Gen Z comes into the workplace out of college soon, and those collisions are going to repeat themselves. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you guys so much for your time today. I loved having you around the round table. We've had so much to talk about. And for our listeners, don't forget to go to pointofview.net or Point of View Radio and like us on Facebook. Thank you for spending your time with us today.
(2020). Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.